somebody, hey, Ben, you should go along that. Yep. We also have pencils in case you don't have a pen to fill out the comment cards. We're gonna collect the comment cards as well as, it also acts as a speaker card towards the end of the presentation. So the second half of the program is dedicated to comments. You can leave a comment card or you can speak as well.
Do you have an extra copy? Do you just want to give it to me so I can carry it around all day? No, it's okay. Unless you needed a certified, signed thing. Sure. Actually, it says this is for Marissa. Maybe I should just give it to Marissa.
Yeah.
Right. Please. Sure, and I'll give one to Tara. I'll do what I can. Sure. 3 is good.
Okay. So, good evening, everybody. My name is Jonathan Martin. Some of you may have seen me in this process before. I want to say thank you for everybody coming out tonight. Everybody's busy. I really appreciate you being here. It's very nice to see so many people here. Before I begin with the presentation, I would like to invite Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer to the podium to make a few comments.
Thank you very much. I am Gail Brewer, Manhattan Borough President, and I want to thank Jonathan Martin very much for being the incredible facilitator. Not many of us deserve thanks, but Jonathan Martin deserves a round of applause. Thank you. So I think every community planning process in the city of New York is very, very challenging. I do want to thank the community because you have come out in numbers and you have been articulate and you've been respectful and you've come up with some phenomenal ideas. So we've obviously been working with Margaret Chin, the council member, and Chair Lago from the City Planning Commission and the amazing staffs of everybody to try to figure out, in my opinion, what is best for the community in terms of the artist community, in terms of preservation, historic, and people, and trying to figure out how the quality of life, the businesses, the property owners, with a long history of the city of New York not doing what it should do in terms of keeping the promises in terms of what should have been in the past. And that is an obvious fact that we have to deal with. So I'm simply here to say that city planning took the amazing task of data gathering and research and analysis, but the real issue and the real information came from all of you through the many 40 meetings and the workshops and the advisory group and the focus groups and everybody who is living in the area or owning or renting or has a business and comes up with the intricacies and the complications of perhaps one of the best districts in the world in terms of artists, creativity, and talent. And how in the world do we keep it talented, creative, and part of New York in a way that you want it to be? So the feedback that we got from you, I hope is incorporated into the future, and that whatever ends up being the proposal is what you want. That's what I want. I do want to say this is not the end of the conversation. Obviously, there is going to be a long process into the fall with all the land use committees of the different community boards and all the aspects of the zoning process that I think you know only too well. So I'm committed to community engagement ongoing. There'll be many more aspects to express your concerns, and I look forward to continuing to work with you. I want to emphasize this is not the end. This is the beginning of, believe it or not, if you can handle it, even more meetings. But it's the only way to have input that is from real people. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Gail. I want to just begin and make sure everybody has an agenda or can see the agenda. We're going to do a presentation for about an hour and cover some of the preliminary recommendations. Again, these are drafts. There's a lot to be studied and worked out as we move forward. As Gail mentioned, there are more meetings and more input to come. And then we'll have a session at the end for about an hour for feedback and comments, and we'd like to hear your input. And with regard to that, everybody should have one of these. I don't care if you take 10, as many as you like. You can write a comment that will go into the record. If you would like to speak at the mic, check that. We're going to have people walking around. You can pass it down the aisle. These will be put in the order received, and then we'll sort of manage it so about 5 or 6 people are at the mics at each time, so we don't have the similar situation as we had the line going out the door on the way in. I'd like to begin by thanking the process sponsors, Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer, Council Member Margaret Chin, and Marissa Lago, Director of the New York City Department of City Planning. I would also like to thank the amazing staff from all 3 process sponsors' offices, whom I have worked very closely with over the last 6 months. They are incredible professionals, and they work tirelessly. I've been so impressed and blessed to have worked with them. The other groups that I've worked with, certainly the advisory group made up of 18 representatives from various organizations representing artists and residents, business owners, other interests and stakeholders in the area. And what began as a process for 5 meetings ended up being a process for 17, 18. We have another one next week after we hear your comments and feedback on what I'm presenting tonight. To work that hard is something that is truly remarkable, and it has been an incredible process working with this group of people. The last person I would like to mention on the screen here is a thank you to Scholastic for hosting us tonight. 2 people in particular would be Jonathan Feldman and Unique Hart, who have worked with us to facilitate not just access to this space tonight, but also several times through the process for focus groups and other meetings. SoHo and NoHo are, I think, very lucky to have such a partner in the neighborhood that can help and assist and is willing to provide space for these important issues. Finally, I'd like to thank all the many hundreds of people who came out to the various meetings, all the way from the very first one to this one tonight, and the willingness to contribute ideas, thoughts, concerns as we move forward. These were all part of the process, and that was truly vital to how this moved forward. I'd like to stop for just a second and do something I did at some of the other meetings. Could I get some hands of how many residents are here? Great. Okay, next one. How many artists are here? Fantastic. How many certified artists are here? Great. How many people from, how many property owners are here? Great. Business owners? Fantastic. And probably last, people from the various agencies and city staff. Okay, so now we kind of know who's who, and I'll begin and move forward. So, as Gail mentioned briefly, this has been the process that we began with and have conducted over the last 6 months. It began with a simple idea that was very difficult and complex to implement. And the simple idea was as follows: conduct a genuine stakeholder and public outreach process to inform future policy making in SoHo and NoHo with no predetermined framework of what the solutions might be. A simple idea that took a long time, I think, for people to buy into and understand what we were trying to do. And as Gail mentioned in her introductory remarks, this is truly something that is different in how New York City approaches community and neighborhood planning. I think the other very unique thing about this is the 3 process sponsors working collegially, supportively, and really always with the best interests of the whole community and the diversity of people that live, work, and own property and own businesses in the SoHo and NoHo neighborhoods. In total, this required about 24 stakeholder meetings, 8 focus groups, and 55 total meetings over the last 6 months in this. In addition, we had website and press releases, and we got a lot of information from the website. It had a tool that you could actually put a comment and place a point, and working with the process sponsors and advisory groups. I want to return to a question that came up several times, maybe more than several times, at some of the earlier meetings. Why SoHo and NoHo, and why now? Really, this process began not 6 months ago, but about 3 or 4 years ago, when the process sponsors began to recognize what the residents and the business owners already knew in SoHo and NoHo. First, that there was an ad hoc parcel-by-parcel approach to neighborhood planning, which meant that certain things popped up and were there, or they were gone sometimes. The uses came in sort of not a managed method. And that results in increasing conflicts of quality of life, which is one of the main things that we heard through this process. Secondly, as the process unfolded, we learned of varied and residential occupancy outcomes as a result of this process, leaving some in precarious legal situations and outdated artist certification. And that was something else we heard from artists and non-artists alike. And a special permit process, which was complex, expensive, lengthy, and uncertain in some instances. And a varied pattern of enforcement. I think enforcement was one of the main themes that we heard a lot about through the process. And there were really 2 key concerns that sort of rose to the top in this process. First was preserve joint live work quarters for artists and ensure that the utility functionality of the JLWQ requirements remain relevant. And so that is an affirmative statement about the importance of JLWQA. And then maintaining appropriate restrictions on the size of retail to protect small-scale proprietors that we know are a difficult thing to continue in a real estate market like SoHo and NoHo. while recognizing also, though, the importance of a diversity of businesses in the neighborhood. And this is all part of this realization that where SoHo and NoHo were about 50 years ago, the changes had occurred and produced what we would say as a planner, a truly developing mixed-use district. I'm going to talk about the recommendations that through this process have emerged. And again, I would like to say that these are preliminary. They're being presented tonight for feedback, and we would appreciate hearing your thoughts on that. They develop around three sort of large categories. The first one, and the one before all, is improved quality of life. The second one is ensure neighborhood vitality, which really speaks to the residential issues and revolves around the issues impacting residents. And finally, promote economic vitality, which begins to ask questions and seek answers for how we might better manage a mixed-use environment as we have today. The recommendations are structured as follows. We have large guiding principles, which I just mentioned, and we might think about those as sort of large goals. What are we trying to accomplish here? We're definitely trying to accomplish an improvement of the quality of life. We're definitely trying to ensure neighborhood vitality, and we're certainly trying to promote economic vitality. And then we have neighborhood priorities. Those neighborhood priorities are smaller goals that together support those larger ideas and the guiding principles. And we can talk a little bit about those as I move forward. And there are 9 I'm going to present tonight. Finally, we have implementation strategies, which really talk about the how. And these are preliminary and they're possible. It's not entirely reasonable to think within 6 months, given the complexity of the situation, that we can come out with a series of precise recommendations that say it should be addressed as such. Rather, we are presenting tonight ideas of how things could possibly be addressed, how they should be looked at, with the caveat that a great deal of additional study will be involved, coordination, involvement of a wide variety of city agencies, further input from the community. And so you'll see the direction we're going tonight, and we would like comments on those as well. I'm going to begin by talking about guiding principle number 1, improve the quality of life. And here we really have some ideas and priorities and strategies to improve the quality of life for residents, workers, and property owners, understanding that the quality of life crosses both aspects of vitality. So that's neighborhood vitality and economic vitality. I think one of the things that became apparent with working with the advisory group, hearing from so many residents at the public meetings as well as in focus groups, was that any of the other things that we might think about, improving the neighborhood in such and such a way, resolving issues of zoning, become almost secondary unless we start to look at the neighborhood we have and improve the quality of life. And so this is sort of one before all others. And the intention here is to address 2 important goals. First, equitably regulate the SoHo and NoHo neighborhoods under a set of community-informed objectives. That's certainly been the case through this process. We've done everything we can to listen, and so you will see the recommendations are developed through this process. Secondly, ensure that benefits of mixed use are captured and leveraged for residents, workers, property owners, and visitors alike. There is something very special about a mixed-use district that actually works. And those special things are the benefits that come from that kind of environment. They can be offset if the conflicts are not managed properly. And so beginning with that, we're talking about how to manage and improve the existing conditions. So neighborhood priority 1 under this principle is to begin to think about improving the quality of life of residents, workers in the SoHo, NoHo mixed-use environment, and begins with this issue of alleviating sidewalk and street congestion, something we heard very clearly. And so this becomes one of the implementation approaches. Possible ideas around this are developing a vending action plan that considers pedestrian circulation while maintaining and allowing vendors to operate. The point here is that getting some baseline rules and guidelines and following that up with enforcement can help improve that situation. It has to be studied very carefully, but that's the intention and the possible implementation idea here. And further study and research under the street scheduling, to understand the street scheduling. And so the street is a dynamic environment, but if we study that and we understand that better, then we can develop a more effective action plan towards that goal. Secondly, implement best practices for loading and unloading, and implement best practices for trash pickup and street cleaning. That, again, is going to need the coordination of a variety of agencies, but we believe this is an important recommendation that can be accomplished with good work ahead. The idea here, though, is best practices is that what we do know is the current situation does not work. And so then we start to begin to think about where else can we look for ideas. One is the public and the people who actually know the neighborhood. Two is looking around the globe and the rest of the country. SoHo and NoHo are not the first places to face these issues. People have resolved them, and that is the idea, to study that and then think of an appropriate plan to resolve some of these issues. Next is better enforcement of zoning rules, building codes, and other regulations. I don't think I have to tell anybody in this room that there needs to be some more attention on that. I would say balancing that with a clear set of rules that can be followed, that are understandable and predictable and can be managed, is equally important. And I think that's been one of the challenges here, that the rules have been circumvented. People have found alternate ways around that. And I think the objective here would be to find a greater predictability and rules that work for everyone, and then enforce them. And that's sort of the intention behind this idea. Finally, create more opportunities for open space and community space and greenery. There are certain challenges in doing that, but I believe it begins with looking at what is available right now, and so that might include improving 2 publicly owned vacant lots owned by DEP presently that should be looked at and turned into green space. Identify opportunities for temporary plazas and green streets, and then develop streetscape design guidelines and implementation to improve greenery, street trees, and if I know we have hollow sidewalks in certain areas, then we need to develop a plan that we can put trees and other things, elements of greenery, green walls and so forth, in place, and develop a plan to effectively manage those and maintain them is part of the idea. Guiding principle 2 is ensure neighborhood vitality. And this revolves around the priorities and strategies to preserve and protect present and future artists and residents, while maintaining SoHo's historic scale and character. The intention here revolves around 2 important goals. First, ensure that current residents, including artists and non-artists that reside in SoHo, can continue to do so. Secondly, ensure that the ability to live, work in SoHo will remain and be expanded. That is part of the soul of these neighborhoods. And that is something that we heard loud and clear. We know there are, tonight, present, many artists. We know there are many more out there. And this ability to live and work where you reside in SoHo and NoHo is part of the defining landscape. And so this second goal becomes very important. Under this guiding principle, there are 3 priorities, and I'll talk about them individually as I move through the next slides. So first, priority 2.1, maintain, enforce, and strengthen existing protection for residents. Yes? I'm sorry? I did? I'm so sorry. Yeah? Okay, so now I'm going to talk individually about each of these. Okay. So to maintain, enforce, strengthen existing protection for residents, including renters and those in rent-regulated units. This begins with something we heard very early in the process, this idea of fairness, of access to affordable housing, or to housing that is regulated in terms of its rent. And we know that there are state-governed loft law units, and those going through that process in the IMD process, and we heard that before you start thinking about other things, we should do everything we can to protect those units. Why do we lose those units and talk about building others? Let's work on what we have, preserve what we have. So here are some of the implementation ideas are to improve the reporting, transparency, and tracking for rent-regulated units. Now, I understand that's held within state law, but we know there was remarkable progress forward today, made today, and even as we speak in that area. And so here, what the call is to improve transparency in that process so we can understand a little bit clearly where things are as they move forward. Secondly, improve tenant harassment protections for rent-regulated units. Again, loft law and IMDs. And you know, what we are meaning by this approach is to, again, protect not just the units, but the people who live within them, and then explore ways to provide rental assistance for low-income artists and other renters. Now, that is going to be a big challenge, but that is identified under this community priority, this neighborhood priority, as being very important. And so the process sponsors have committed to looking at new ways and exploring ways to find how that might be accomplished. Neighborhood Priority 2.2, support and promote the artist and maker community while allowing people to live in SoHo and NoHo without artist certification. This is something that came very clearly from the diversity of people who participated in the process. At the public hearings, they were a bit more of a minority voice, but nonetheless, we know there are lots of artists, and we also know there are lots of people who are not artists living in SoHo and NoHo. So the idea here is to support and promote the artist and maker community while allowing others to live. So first in that approach would be to maintain JLWQA as a permitted use and allow for the creation of new types of units and buildings to ensure art making and maker uses can continue to coexist with other uses and residents. Secondly, develop pathways to legalize non-artist residence. This revolves around issues that I'm sure we're all very aware of, that JLWQA requires artist certification, and we have people living in those units who are not certified. So there are maybe a variety of ways of approaching that. I'll talk about some ideas that are early, that need more thought, more development. But the idea here is to develop a pathway to bring people into conformity, one way or the other. Connect artists to affordable housing and studio opportunities and explore affordable live, work, and housing typologies conducive to and supportive of art making and creating. This might go back to when I began talking about this principle of neighborhood vitality and the importance of live work. And so this implementation strategy here begins to talk very clearly about how we think about future uses in SoHo and NoHo with this live work component in support of makers and creators and art making. Continuing on this neighborhood priority, we have explore ways to modernize the artist certification process. That is a bit of a difficult challenge, mainly because that is set in state law, but nonetheless, we heard very clearly that one of the ways to create pathways and also to support and nurture the arts as it has evolved over time. This has been now 50 years, and we have new ways and new ways of thinking about what constitutes making an art. We have this current terminology of micro-manufacturing, which seems to be speaking very directly to the types of spaces that could be developed to accommodate such uses. But exploring ways to modernize that artist certification process. Secondly, under defined parameters, identify additional resources to support and promote the artist community, including tax abatements and other incentives, and by leveraging the business community to support arts and culture. This really is about looking for ways to help perpetuate and maintain what is the legacy of these two neighborhoods. And I think we heard that very clearly. I think there's full agreement how important that is. I mean, if that disappears, this is what I've learned through this process. If that disappears, then SoHo and NoHo become like any other place. And nobody wants that. And so we've got to really help support this artist and creator economy. How might this go forward? We don't have that quite figured out. It's a very difficult process. It's going to require a lot of further study. But I'm going to present now in this next slide a possible idea. And this sort of brings us between 2 points in time, today and tomorrow. And today, if we just look at JLWQA as one element of neighborhood vitality, we see that we have JLWQA units with conforming occupancy, those who are conforming with artist certification. And then we have a series of JLWQA units that are non-conforming occupancy without artist certification. And so we need to figure out a pathway forward, again, to bring this place, this neighborhood, back to a position where we can work on some of these other issues that are really important to making this place a good place to live, work, operate a business, and develop the economy. So beginning here, we might consider some sort of pathway to allow for non-artist amnesty until a time of sale or a change in the tenant. So somebody becomes conforming. It solves this. It also does another thing. This is a very different approach than has been operated in the past. The previous, or the existing conditions, is more of a regulatory framework with penalties and enforcement that we know are difficult to implement for a variety of reasons. So this switches everything. And this creates incentives for people to move along that pathway. One of those incentives is allowing for an amnesty for that person in that unit until the time of sale. or change in occupancy. So that is where we are right here tomorrow. Right here. Then, at the time of sale or a change in tenancy, it could go forward as follows. The option is you can remain as a JLWQA use, but that requires and will be enforced the idea that you conduct the sale to a certified artist. That unit stays the same. Through another mechanism to be determined, we introduce a new live-work use that recognizes all types of work in that unit. There's no percentage or limitation on allocation between live-work. That means it is truly a live-work. It has, along with it, the same privileges that go along to conduct artist and maker activities. And finally, to encourage and support the artists and the creative economy here, this idea of making, resources would need to be identified to further to support and incentivize artists, makers, micro manufacturers, cultural workers to be able to afford and live in those units. And so again, this is an incentive approach. We would like that unit to have tenancy by an artist or a micro manufacturer, this heart and soul of the district. And so in order to do that, rather than saying we have a bunch of regulations that say only these certain people can live here and you have to get a qualification, rather we broaden that qualification and say if you qualify under this, you can access some additional resources to support the artist and maker community. And so this is a complete sort of reversal, if you will, of how we might go away about supporting the artists. It does one other thing too, which is really important. Because it supports all types of work, it becomes much more inclusive. And it does support ideas of fairness. It also resolves some of the sticky situations that we currently have in JLWQA. It's an idea. It hasn't been quite worked out, but it is a pathway forward to resolve some of the issues that we have in ensuring neighborhood vitality. So, neighborhood priority 2.3, create housing and live-work opportunities on underused land in ways that respect and support the neighborhood vitality and character. So this begins by implementing ideas and studying ideas to allow residential use, live-work units, shared studio maker spaces, and other services in new buildings in these areas that are underutilized. Create more affordable housing and connect people, including artists, to affordable housing opportunities. Again, thinking about affordable housing for artists has been explored a lot by the city. There are some models, but again, we have to think about an approach that includes all people and incentivizes those things that we want to promote, like the arts and maker uses, maker activities. And finally, with respect to this, ensure height, scale, and density, including FAR, of new buildings so that they are in context with the existing historic buildings and neighborhood-built environment. And I think this recommendation, an idea for implementation, how this might go about, still needs to be worked out. However, this idea is something that responds to something we heard very clearly, which was the importance and maybe the fear that the overall physical characteristic of these neighborhoods would change. Guiding principle number 3 is ensuring, promoting economic vitality. And really, this starts to revolve around 2 important goals as well. Protect and advance local serving, locally owned small businesses, and arts and cultural maker uses. So that is indeed the economy we're interested in promoting. Secondly, and with equal vigor, support all businesses in the neighborhood and make sure that any of those advancements are also paired with and connected to the overall guiding principle of improving quality of life. And so here we begin to talk about three neighborhood priorities. And these are formed around a few ideas. First, to shape and control the commercial environment by maintaining the 10,000 square foot size limit as a base across the district, but also allow a wider range of commercial uses on the ground floor as of right throughout the district. Secondly, give special consideration to sub-areas within the neighborhoods to be determined based on factors such as that relate to surrounding context, building footprint size, street widths, some other things, and to look at this in a way that doesn't take both SoHo and NoHo, treat them identically, nor does it take both neighborhoods together and says there's a one size that fits all. Because one of the things that we do know, and in fact, in the very first thematic workshop, we worked on identifying the mixed-use environment that is in SoHo and NoHo. And the feedback we got from that was that it's very varied. And so it doesn't make sense, in my opinion, to come up with one set of rules that govern everything. And so what we start to do is we move forward in planning. And we start to say that these areas should have different regulations and rules versus other areas. And we start to understand the fine grain and the importance of treating areas differently in relationship to the quality of life of the neighborhood as a whole. So I will talk about these three priorities. First one, preserve, promote, and create more spaces and uses for arts, maker, and cultural uses as a starting point, and explore ways to affirm SoHo and NoHo's art heritage. Certainly research will be needed, but we can think creatively about protecting and promoting cultural assets, including arts and cultural uses, and thinking about this more broadly in terms of what if SoHo and NoHo began to be thought of and promoted and established formally as an arts and a cultural district. Again, further promoting that identity, reinforcing that identity. In a way, I would argue, working against the forces that have changed this area so dramatically. In a way, this is part of what came out of this process as a vision. And so to start thinking about what is the future of these neighborhoods, rather than simply addressing the attendant issues that are on the ground right now, one at a time, on a piecemeal ad hoc approach. Let's think about what this place wants to be in the future and work towards that. And so it begins with preserving, promoting, and creating more spaces for arts, maker, and cultural uses. Secondly, continue to allow art making and maker uses such as JLWQA, art studios, custom manufacturing, while making it easier for a diverse range of art, culture, and maker uses to evolve and expand in the neighborhood. But that arts and culture and making establishments to evolve requires new ways of thinking about them. Understanding that places and arts and art establishments do evolve and change. And as they do, we need to provide some accommodation to allow that to happen. Also, as things have changed from 50 years ago, we might want to attract new types of establishments and they may want to locate here. And so creating an environment where they can, I think, would be conducive to promoting arts and culture in these areas. For context, we might start to begin to think about the existing zoning. So for example, the existing zoning does not allow, as of right, commercial art galleries. It seems difficult to preserve, promote, and create more spaces if some of those types of uses are not allowed. Secondly, any expansion of, say, an existing museum or a museum that wants to expand is not allowed as of right under the current zoning. This is the way it was written 50 years ago. I think things have changed. We have to recognize that. And community facilities, these things that contribute to the quality of life, community spaces, other things that you need to make a full, whole, healthy mixed-use district, are, other than houses of worship right now, are not permitted. You can't do that. And so looking at those regulations carefully, studying them as we move forward. Again, as Gail said, this is not the end tonight. This is sort of the beginning of a process where we now have some clear ideas and some possible ways to implement. This has to be studied, and as we move forward, we'll have more information and more engagement on these ideas. Secondly, start to begin with neighborhood priority, continuing on this, I apologize, leverage the business and not-for-profit communities to activate or reactivate underused spaces such as empty storefronts with artists, makerspace, and small businesses. How can we facilitate that, and how can we encourage that? Again, details have to be worked out, but this is one of the ways that we can begin to think about promoting the arts and culture and using some of those underutilized spaces. Encourage the creation of new maker spaces such as shared studio or co-working spaces in new buildings. This begins to think very clearly about the idea of how do we promote that legacy. If we don't start thinking differently, as my professional opinion, a lot of that won't flourish. It will continue to disappear, and we need to hold on to that. Now, to do so requires different thinking than we had 50 years ago. The idea that while we're saying here, certainly suggesting JLWQA and live work will continue, those are not always accessible, affordable to other artists emerging. The idea of innovation in the district. And so maybe we think about other ways of accommodating that, as other places have around the world, with shared studio and co-working spaces. This would probably involve a role of a talented not-for-profit to run something like this. So, and that's one possible way of thinking about it. Second, lastly here, explore options for tax incentives and other forms of financial support for arts, culture, and makers, including individuals and organizations. So the previous 4 elements under this neighborhood priority begin to get supported through a variety of incentives. Neighborhood priority 3.2, foster the small business community of SoHo and NoHo by reducing regulatory barriers and providing supportive resources. I mean, this begins to talk back to where I was a couple slides ago talking about the limitations in the current zoning. But it talks about a more important point, I think, that began at one of our first meetings and has been reiterated, I think, either explicitly, but mostly implicitly through the process, which is providing a predictable framework under which to manage SoHo and NoHo and its mixed-use environment, and doing so in a way that supports small businesses such as independent retailers and local services of appropriate neighborhood scale. And it's very difficult for those small businesses, as I heard personally from many people through the process, to make a go of it here. And we need, and that revolves around many dimensions, but the need to look at the regulatory framework, and so it's more predictable. Predictability comes in another fashion too, in that the special permit process that is in place right now is more onerous and challenging for small businesses and small business operators and even small property owners, because it takes a lot of effort, it's very complex, and it can be quite expensive. And so if what I heard and what we've heard through the process is true, that we value small business and we want local services, people have said things have disappeared. The clinic left a while ago. I think that if we want to support those, then we have to create an environment that leads to success stories on that level and supports those initiatives. 3.2b, specify and allow incentivize scarce neighborhood uses that aim to serve the community and identify spaces that can provide below rent opportunities for small businesses. Again, a very difficult thing to maybe envision how it may get implemented. This is going to take a lot of work by the process sponsors to take a look at how this idea can be operationalized, but there's commitment to do so. And it's another way of supporting those things that we heard from many people are important. From maybe a personal perspective and even a professional perspective, you can't have a neighborhood unless you have those kind of things. It's vital for people to live in neighborhoods. It's part of this mixed use, this healthy mixed use that we're hoping to accomplish here. Finally, expand and support services for small business owners that plan on growing in place. And so this would be thinking about opportunities of working with other city agencies, such as the Small Business Services, that have a whole variety of tools and training and support for small businesses. Again, that takes effort. A small business operator has a lot to do, and so there has to be encouragement, easy pathways that they can access that support that they need, and will help them succeed. Finally, neighborhood priority 3.3, promote mixed use in ways that respect and support the neighborhood vitality and character. And this begins with something I talked about when I introduced this guiding principle of promoting economic vitality. First of all, allow a wider range of compatible uses on ground floors, including cellars, such as retail, food stores, community facilities, arts and culture, while maintaining the 10,000 square foot cap on retail. So if we begin to think about what that really sort of entails, it talks about allowing for uses on the ground floor in an environment that is currently mixed use, but only allows retail, as of right, on the second floor and above, which leads us back into that position that you have to go through a special permit, which is complex, expensive, and onerous, and is more onerous for small business owners. Further, allowing such uses beyond the ground floor and in greater capacity in specifically to be defined areas in SoHo and NoHo. And that relates back to thinking about the district not as a single one-size-fits-all, but to think about the existing mixed use as it is, nurturing that economic vitality, and beginning to set up predictable, understandable, enforceable rules and guidelines. Explore guidelines to accommodate different uses in a single space. This is something we heard from large retailers and property owners and small business owners and small property owners. This ability that currently, if you go through the special permit process, you end up with a special permit to do X and only X. Any change in that requires some further review at a later date. And so this would begin to think about allowing different uses in a single space to respond to the current changing retail environment that business owners are facing. Finally, consider scale, type, and hours in operation of eating and drinking uses while maintaining current regulations on bars and entertainment establishments. Where the advisory group ended up on this was thinking about the ability to create uses that would allow for eating casual, fast, casual types of food, but a very clear line on this idea that nightclubs and bars and these kind of things would proliferate well into the night. And I think part of that is a discussion back to the quality of life. And so examining these ideas and thinking about scale, type, and hours of operation makes sense. And so how that will be done is yet to be determined, and that's a very difficult job for the process sponsors, but this is coming out as a recommendation in this presentation and up for your comment. So I'll summarize with some conclusions. And I want to talk a little bit about what I think this process means, why I think it was very important, why I think it was necessary. It wasn't easy for any of us, I know that. But the process and these preliminary recommendations recognize that SoHo and NoHo has changed and that the current regulations that are 50 years old now are ineffective in supporting the diverse mixes of uses and the environment that exists today. The process responds to community input to consider and balance the needs of a diverse group of stakeholders. This was a tremendous outreach process, I believe, and to think about the diversity of people, of businesses, of property owners, and the myriad of conditions. The ideas that were presented tonight were truly informed through that process. It affirms the importance of SoHo's and NoHo's legacy of artists, and makers, while proposing new ways to modernize the rules to allow for a wider range of artists, makers, and others to live in these neighborhoods. In a way, even though that diagram that I presented is an idea, the idea, maybe the details are not quite worked out, but the idea is clear. It's to move us forward to accomplish just this, to affirm the importance of this place while allowing other people to live here legally. This process and the recommendations seek to incentivize people in varied occupancy statuses to transition to conformity, to get out of those potentially precarious situations, to think more clearly about transition and moving forward. And this is something that we not only heard from people who are living under quote-unquote the SoHo letter or whatever it might be. They've used an alternate method. We also heard this very clearly from artists themselves who wanted new ways to transition forward. One example is, I would love my daughter to be able to live here. At this point, she cannot, legally. And so how can we develop pathways forward? And we do so under this idea through incentives rather than regulations and guidelines that say this, that in 10 years we end up right back where we are. And I don't think that's where we want to be. Finally, this process expands allowable uses on the ground floor in a way that respects community character and context and in support of local serving and locally owned businesses. Gives them more of a fighting chance. Yes, does this do this for everybody? Certainly. But unless you do it, it is going to be very difficult to support those kind of uses, and the small makers, that's what we're trying to accomplish. And finally, it supports a suite of possible implementation strategies that, while requiring further study, offer a comprehensive approach within and beyond zoning. So if you remember, we go back to the very first public meeting, there was this question that this was only about rezoning. And we've refrained from talking about that because, as I said, there was an unpredetermined approach, outcome, where we thought this would go. On this process, and the ideas have been developed through this process. They do require further study, but it's not only about land use regulations and zoning. It begins to talk about a wide range of policies, an immense coordination and cooperation and involvement of a wide variety of city agencies to improve the quality of life. And so this really is quite a comprehensive set of suggestions or recommendations. I'll close in the last couple slides here by asking some questions that I think maybe people have on their mind. First one is, will there be a rezoning, and when will ULURP start? To answer that, after completion of the engagement report, which I will produce later this summer, the process sponsors will review and further consider the recommendations, input forwarded by the advisory group and the community members, and identify potential next steps. 2, there is no plan to develop a zoning proposal without further discussions with Community Board 2 and the community. The process sponsors plan to come before CB2 Land Use Committee in October to restart the conversation and gather additional feedback on the report and have dialogue about what those next steps might be. Second question, will the sponsors agree to conduct an artist census before any next steps? This is something that came up several times, more than several times through the process. And it came up from many different factions and interests in the process. And so we heard a diverse set of opinions on this, from the artists and non-artist residents. Some call for an artist census. Some have serious privacy concerns about that. Others doubt the utility of it and whether it is entirely necessary, given the ideas and the impetus that we're presenting tonight. In my report, I will recommend that the process sponsors continue studying the viability of getting a more accurate estimate of how many certified artists actually live in SoHo and NoHo. So I will make that recommendation in the report. Next question. On what basis will decisions be made as to which policies will be pursued and adopted by whom? This was a question that I wanted to address because I was quite struck by something that happened, I believe, in the second thematic workshop, where somebody from the community said, you know what's going to happen here is we're going to go through all of this, we're going to give all this information, and then the city will only take the ideas that it wants, and some of those things that we're concerned about may not see the light of day. So this begins to say directly, how are you going to make those decisions as we move forward? This is a whole lot of different ideas. The process sponsors will work together and consider the entire package of recommendations holistically. Identify the right lead for different research, policy, and implementation ideas and items. So, for example, Councilmember Chin's office and the Manhattan Borough President's office will take a lead on legislative items such as strengthening rent regulation. DCP, obviously a more technical department, will focus on zoning and land use related items, as well as items that require interagency coordination to address quality of life concerns. And there will be an evaluation of the appropriate time frames for different types of actions. Next question. What will be the function of the process website after the release of the report later this summer? It will continue to be a repository of information, including the presentation on data, public feedback gathered, summaries of the advisory group meetings we've had, and the focus group meetings, online engagement comments, and all of the other things that have been associated with this process over the last 6 months. It will no longer act as an active, interactive tool, but there will be opportunity for the public to still connect and comment with the SoHo NoHo team by email and reaching out to process sponsors. CB2 will continue to be the process process sponsor's partner in disseminating information. And from here, the process is really moving over to the community board for further engagement. What are the next steps precisely? Comments and feedback on tonight's presentation will be accepted on the website until June 20th. So that will be open for a week. We'll also get comments tonight at the mic and through the comment cards. After this, the public can connect with SoHo and NoHo team through email up here. I believe it's also on the agenda. It will be certainly available in prominent location on the website. Summer 2019. The report will be released and posted on the website. I'm unable in 50 or 60, 65 minutes to explain the depth and the complexity behind many of the ideas that have been presented tonight. The report will do that in appropriate detail. And in October 2019, the process sponsors will continue the engagement with the community at CB2 land use meetings, and we'll move forward from there. So just as a reminder, this is the website for Envision SoHo and NoHo. And again, for the next week, the whole interactive tool will be available, and you can write and send comments. Thereafter, email will be accepted. And now we'd like to move over to hearing comments and feedback. If the staff could help coordinate that, that would be great. How would we do this?
Staff has already started collecting.
Mm-hmm.
And then you should do 5 people.
So I'm calling
Yeah,
the
you
next
can call
5
them.
people. Okay, great, thank you. And so the way it's going to work is I'm going to call names of people who have asked to speak, and you can come down to either mic. First person, Susan Mizell. Sure.
Oh, okay. I thought we were just going to line up here.
Okay. Next person, Ingrid Weigard. Juan Reyes.
My paper, though, it has my notes on it. Oh. That's why I didn't hand it in. Okay. Whatever.
Somebody named George. Mark Rappel. Bill Rosa. And I believe this is Sante Saducci. Suducho.
Did you?
Okay, you go ahead of me because ladies first. I don't really know.
Okay, all right. Just,
Okay, thanks, Rick.
are the mics live?
Damn right. Okay.
Yes. And we would like to, if possible, we're expecting a lot of comments tonight. If you could keep your comments to about 2 minutes, we would definitely appreciate that. Thank you. Please.
All right, I'm Ingrid Wiegand.
Yes.
This is going to be very limited of necessity. The promise, as I take it, to keep every artist in place is good, and to expand the occupancy, residential occupancy, to live work of all kinds. I suggest that you consider the, say, 3-year filing of a Form C as proof that this is a legitimate live-work person.
Okay.
On the retail, the arcaneness of the, if that's the word, of the process has been because originally retail was prohibited except for existing retail. I think it was later made as of '86, I'm not sure. But it was the idea that had vitality then, that manufacturing and manufacturing-related business like showrooms needed to occupy this, and retail would push up the rent. This has not been true for like 40 years. And therefore, maintaining a ridiculous, not a ridiculous, but an out-of-date process made these stores impossible for small businesses. There are several neighborhood businesses who are continuously harassed because they are only very wealthy, moneyed businesses can afford the process of going for a variance. So making first floor retail, first floor stores available as retail as of right would be a process that would further everyone. However, you mentioned something, which is, you said you would recommend keeping the 10,000 square foot limit to retail, but you started to say that you would have exceptions, and you would basically enable businesses to be, buildings to be addressed on a case-by-case basis. This is the way to destroy the area, and there should be nothing above 10,000. And this is a real, not good. And as far as how you can possibly keep eating and drinking establishments in line, the community boards do this every month. They review several hundred applications, and they keep them. You don't need to do this.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Just so everybody knows, in the interest of time and also my role as a facilitator, I can't answer every question, and we probably won't answer questions. We are entering these questions into the record. Yes, sir.
My name is Bill Rosser. I'm a resident and property owner for the last 25 years in NoHo. I now own a property. I reside in NoHo, but my wife has a studio in SoHo. I think what's done tonight is very good. I appreciate everything you've done, Jonathan. I'm not to take away anything of the ideas, the concepts that are presented. But I have a concern, and I think that I want to bring up an awareness to everybody of another issue. There may be some other forces, some other powers here in place. So it started out when people are curious about why did this all start? Where did this come from? What's the real reason? Well, let me offer you a possible explanation. And that's, in fact, it's an NYU report called, quote, Housing and Classrooms, Not Parking, Overcoming Zoning Gridlock in NoHo. You know what they want to have?
More dorms.
Classrooms in NoHo, which are currently prohibited east of Broadway, and more kinds of housing, and how they're going to do it. So the report, which spells this out in some detail, is amazing, is prepared by NYU's Wagner School of Public Service, dated February 2019. It's a 25-page report. It's readily available online. You can get a PDF, printout. It's quite fascinating. But here's what you need to know. What's the bottom line? Proposals of NYU. Number one, new residential construction should be allowed at an FAR of 10, not 5. 10. On wide streets in NoHo, Broadway, Lafayette, Bowery, and Houston. Now, secondly, any non-residential floor area in buildings with no residences could be converted to college or university use. Any space, non-residential, could be converted to college or university use. So classrooms galore would be a possibility. You know, well, there are 6 specific sites proposed for development. 3 parking lots, currently parking lots, on Lafayette between Gray Jones and Astor Place. A 1-story building at Lafayette and Bleecker, where you may know used to be Shapiro Hardware. Another 1-story at 4th Street and Bowery, BB Bar and Grill. And 1-story on Broadway, currently McDonald's, a 1-story building now opposite Washington Place. So they specify those are ones that they want to convert. They'd like to see this all changed. They'd like to see them open up. So I'm just laying out a position of NYU, and I'm not making any connection necessarily. I want you, the members, the neighborhood, to decide, what do you think of this?
I will respond to this just very briefly because we have been aware of that report, and it is a personal academic thought piece by the author, and NYU has issued a statement that has said that is not their position. That is what they said. Okay, all right, I'm sorry, but that was by a guest. That was by a guest visiting professor, and he wrote this. Okay. I'm sorry. Let's go to this side. Hi.
Hi, good evening. My name is Juan Reyes. I'm a partner in the law firm Safar Shaw, and I represent the owners of 6163 Crosby Street, they're between Broome and Spring Street. And we're in agreement with one of the previous speakers that small retail works here. We have a site, and I'm familiar with the neighborhood. I was counsel for the Loft Board and for general counsel for BSA. And I mean, this is an artist neighborhood. There should be small businesses. We're not taking any position on eating and drinking. We're not interested in doing that. We want small retail. Half of our site to the north is allowed as of right to have retail. That's about 2,176 feet. The southern half is 3,177 feet. It's just a small retail. It doesn't make sense, I don't think, as some of the other speakers have said, that to go through the advertising process and all these different hoops and everything else. I think it probably served a purpose a long time ago, but I think nice, clean retail that fits in with the neighborhood character. It would be nice to have some type of artwork themed retail here, but I think, and I understand that small businesses, it's impossible for them to really go through that process, and I think it really has to be as of right for these smaller 3,000 or a little bit more than that type of uses to be allowed as of right. So that's our position.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, and we did a submission, so you should have that. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Just so everybody knows, my colleague Mark is transcribing this, so we have a full record. Yeah. Okay, sir, about 2 minutes, please.
My name is George, and I want to encourage the planning agencies behind the study on underwriting and supporting all the artistic heritage every aspect of what you've put up here, that's all good. And that's the heritage that should be included.
Okay.
So particularly the joint live work quarters, the use of those quarters, sometimes noxic uses in those quarters, all that is part of it. So I do want to note the aspect of your data collection, which is maybe a little bit lacking.
Okay.
And that is roughly half the people in this room, when asked, were artists.
Correct.
Most of them were certified.
Right.
So I can personally think of dozens of others who are not here and were never asked, including me. So very many people don't even know about this. The artistic community,
Okay.
they're here. And what's happening in SoHo and NoHo is another reiteration of artistic activity. Galleries are coming back, pop-up art events are happening all the time. All this is part of a very, very healthy process. So far from thinking, oh, everyone left, oh, the galleries are gone. No, not at all.
Right.
Not at all.
Right.
And those things should be held foremost and endorsed in any kind of plan that moves forward. So, for
Thank you.
speaking for the artists.
Thank you. Yep. Sir.
Hi, my name's Mark Ropel. I'm a resident. There were some interesting ideas in your talk. I just want to restrict myself to the issue of residential access. I attended 3 of the meetings that you held, the public meetings.
Yep.
And unfortunately, I found that they were dominated, the public sessions were dominated by a small group of very vocal people. But when we broke out into the tables, it was much more productive. And at all 3 tables I sat at, every single person, artist and non-artist alike, agreed that in addition to live work, SoHo should be zoned for residential. So I'm very disappointed to see you haven't come up with any meaningful way to address that. Grandfathering is not addressing it. You're taking people's property. If they can't sell, they don't own it. It's unfair. I mean, I don't know about the value of a survey. I mean, maybe you need to do it because there seems to be some disagreement. But I'm sure you know, it's a very small minority of people who have ARR certificates. And to take everybody else's property away is fundamentally undemocratic. If this process can't address it, then we need perhaps a more transparent process like a referendum.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Trevor Galena. I'm a retail leasing broker here in SoHo. And the issue I want to talk about wasn't on your display, so forgive me if I'm a little bit out of line. But I think that the scaffolding that we see everywhere is burdensome. I know that for a retailer, when you put up a scaffolding in front of their store, it really kills their business. Mom and pop shops, if you put it up there, it's kind of a death sentence for about 6 months. You know, we're starting to see some, hold on one second, this is not working. We're starting to see different scaffolding companies that have higher walkways when you walk through them as opposed to the traditional ones that are very low. Look, why not be audacious enough to suggest that in SoHo and in NoHo, you have to have this certain type of scaffolding that's actually sort of pleasant to walk under.
Right.
And another issue that's very confusing for retailers and landlords alike is whether or not if you're allowed to advertise the store or the brand or whatever on the scaffolding on the green shed. I mean, I don't know how great people think that green color is, but if you're a retailer and your foot traffic is gone because you've got scaffolding, it'd be a great help if you were allowed to advertise on the scaffolding. And it's very confusing right now whether or not you can. So
Good.
if we could clarify that, that'd be great. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Oh, good evening. My name is actually Sante Scardillo, not Scarducci. No, that's okay. It's my handwriting is a little confusing, and in fact, I apologize to everybody because my own notes that I took as the speaker was going on are even unreadable to me because I didn't have anything to. So I'll just try to improvise.
You made me feel better.
Well,
Thank you.
First of all, my sympathy for being the lightning rod for this process. But, you know, I hope that our recommendations, I don't need an answer from you today. I want them to be taken on board. And I'm going to try to be brief and summarize a few things. History is important. Soho, the way it is today, I have my dinosaur skin here, which, you know, I didn't used to wear when I arrived in 1981. I remember walking back and forth on Broadway from the Mud Club every night, which was my living room and everybody else's, and it was a desert. Then the art galleries that were initially on West Broadway started to go everywhere. Then, you know, whether right or not, regulation always trails innovation. The art galleries, for social, philosophical, and financial reasons, moved to Chelsea in the mid-1990s. After coming back from this village in the mid-80s, there were migrations that were dictated by real estate trends and other variations. Now, I find it laughable also that, you know, you say the museums cannot expand. The new museum, which is the biggest museum in the area, is expanding presently. So whether by rights or not, things are always happening. And instead of following and trying to trail, I believe that the legislative bodies, the executive should lead when possible. So, you know, one thing that I'm going to start immediately to say is bring back rent control for commercial establishments, because this used to happen until 1965, and then it was gone. Why? Bring it back. You know, of course things are going to close if they can't afford the rent, and the rent, the sky is not even the limit, it's the stratosphere. So the other thing that is the elephant in the room, and thank God for somebody brought it up, is the so-called non-for-profits that are becoming developers. NYU, I am an ashamed alumnus of NYU. I went there with a full tuition scholarship because of the quality of my work was handpicked. And I made it clear, I have no money. They say, don't worry about it. Back then, tuition was $6,000 a year. It was easy to cover. I mean, $6,000 was good money back then. But today, it's impossible. It's impossible for anybody to go to NYU that is not rich, well-funded, and ready to fit into this humongous juggernaut that goes on and on and on. I mean, we won at the state level when we tried to stop the development at the Silver Towers. And then the Court of Appeals just reversed it. So the process is broken, and I know you can't fix it on your own. I hope that the people here in this room, together with everybody, we are going to do something about this. So these are just a few ideas, but one is take on board some artists in your process, in your commissions, in your panels that make decisions, and hear what they have to say. Take on board what they have to say. You know, I don't care if it's me or if it's anybody else, but you want to talk about art and what happens in this area, listen to the people who do it. You know, don't just say, oh, well, as of rights, there can be art galleries. The art galleries were here, the most powerful in the world. Leo Castelli was on West Broadway for many years until basically he died. So, you know, something is going on outside of the boardrooms where you make the research and the decisions. And interestingly, I just want to close with this. History is important because Soho and NoHo, and this is not an endorsement of this process, but, you know, it's the way things happen. Development started at the tip of Manhattan and came up. Soho and NoHo were both luxury neighborhoods. That's how they began. Then they fell in disrepair. Then the artists saved it from condemnation. It's ironic that now the city wants to get involved. The city had condemned it, and that's what made Soho, together with the community activists and the artists, saved it. So let's work together. Let's do something. Thank you very much, and sorry to take so much time.
Thank you very much. Yeah, let me call a few more names. Julie Harrison, Ronnie Wolf, Trevor Galina, already spoke, okay. Andrew Berman, Marna Lawrence, Michael Levine, and we'll stop there. Thank you. Hi, good evening.
You called my name. I'm
Yes,
Julie
no,
Harrison.
good evening.
I've lived in the neighborhood of Soho for almost 42 years. I've seen a lot of changes. I tell people now, out of the country and out of the city, that I live in a shopping mall. I'm curious about why you didn't, and maybe you did and I didn't hear it. Excuse me if that's the case, but how many landlords are here? You didn't ask landlords to raise your hand. Are there any?
It was an oversight,
Not too many. Because I'm wondering, how are you going to get this to happen? You're going to regulate some things and deregulate others. So are you going to get the landlords to reduce the rent on these storefronts that no one can afford? Or even lofts, whether they're live work or non-live work, no one can afford them unless you're in the rent regulation, which I am. Thankfully, and I have a very nice landlord. Thank God. I thank them all the time. So I think that I also have other questions. What does develop the economy mean? I mean, it's already so overdeveloped here. What does develop the economy mean? What is affordable housing? If you look on the city, this is all, I call BS on this. This affordable housing, if you look on the city rates of what affordable housing is, if you make $60,000 for a family of 4, you should then, therefore, be able to pay $4,000 a month in rent. That is affordable housing. So when you talk about affordable housing, I call BS on that. And what is a small business? A small business, by definition, could be hundreds of employees. You're not talking about mom and pop stores. Most businesses in Soho and NoHo are small businesses. Maybe Bloomingdale's isn't. All right, so there are some chains that aren't. But most are small businesses. So what are you saying when you want to have more small businesses come in? And how are those rents going to be affordable? It's all great on paper, but I want to just point out that the politicians behind this are the same ones who, after Community Board 2, 100% said, we don't want NYU to expand. They're building an over 30-floor tower that expands an entire block between Green and Mercer on Houston Street. Have you ever looked at the pictures? The pictures hide that. That tower is in the back. But here it is, the gateway to Soho and NoHo. And that's what these politicians have allowed, the same ones that are so-called running this show. So quality of life, empty lots. Come on, we have Mulberry Street that already exists and is beautiful. I'd like to see more hours open, and they're tearing that down. They tore down the public lots at NYU, and NYU is just not a small business. It's a huge multi-billion-dollar corporation, and they have bought this city and this neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Ronnie.
My name's Ronnie Wolf. Considering commercial property owners' position, seeking zoning changes towards flexibility with allowances for unrestricted retail, how much time did the advisory group spend discussing details about the potential size and location of eating and drinking establishments? And in terms of consensus, what was the result of those discussions?
I'm sorry, we're going to take that into the record and go from that.
It's good.
Thank you, Ronnie.
My name is Paul Vidic. I've lived in Soho since 1977, raised our children here, and the thing that I'd like to address is the quality of life, which you started with, but it never really got very specific as to what you would do about the burdens on the quality of life. You mentioned street traffic, but in none of that discussion is the issue of noise. And noise is become a big issue in Soho. Last night on Green Street, there was an hour of loud music that by 10 o'clock, across the street on Adidas, the store on Spring Street, they once a week or maybe once every 2 weeks organize a special giveaway, and the people begin assembling at 6 in the morning. And there have been numerous occasions in which the police have been called in order to manage the problem. The unintended consequence, of course, of all of the successful retail is the increase in foot traffic. With the increase in foot traffic have come food trucks. And in any given day, there are 5 or 6 in Soho, which do 2 things. One, they contribute a lot of noise because they have generators that are operating 8 hours a day as they're parked illegally. And secondly, they contribute diesel exhaust. In London, they've banned food trucks that contribute diesel exhaust because it's not healthy. So, you know, if you could, and thank you very much for the great effort you put into this, it would be wonderful to see a way in which noise and the contributors to noise could be addressed in this planning process.
Thank you. Before you start, can I call some other names, maybe down to this mic? For Paul Vidich. Oh, that was, oh, so sorry. How do you say that? Susan Stoltz. Oh, she's there. David Thal. Great. Thank you. Alex Kuznechenko. Ben Carlos Theipen. William Thomas. Jake Schmidt. And Spencer Heckwood. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you. I'm Andrew Berman from Village Preservation. So a couple of comments. Having been through this process many times before, a few things occur to me. It's not uncommon to see what we saw tonight, which is a broad range and menu of things that the city is saying, well, we're going to try to address this, we're going to try to address this. But you have this one process, which is a rezoning, which is very definite. You give away a change in the zoning to developers. They have an inalterable right then to go ahead and do it. And all these other things that are supposed to come along with it that are supposed to affect the quality of life of the community or are somehow supposed to mitigate for it never really seem to materialize in the way that they are promised. Just to give an example, in recent years under this administration, there's been 2 rezonings in this general vicinity. One on the west side, where at the St. John site, where there was supposed to be a large amount of affordable housing that was supposed to come along as part of the deal, but the developer was given an escape clause, which he utilized, and now virtually none of that affordable housing is going to be built, but the rezoning went through. Just last year on 14th Street, the Tech Hub rezoning, which was approved, when it was approved, it was announced that there would be these mitigations along with it, a prohibition on hotel development in certain areas, as well as tenant protections. A year later, none of that has materialized. So it's very hard to look at this and to see this sort of broad range of wonderful ideas of things that could be done to the neighborhood and not think, well, we know which parts of it are likely to happen and which parts of it are likely to never happen. So a couple of other points I want to make. It was mentioned in the presentation the possibility of, on underutilized sites, there being accommodations for affordable housing. Now, if a site is currently underutilized under the existing zoning, they can build a bigger building than what is there. So either what we're talking about is an upzoning, which we know this administration has never seen an upzoning it hasn't liked, or we're talking about implementing some sort of requirement for affordable housing. And there's a big difference between the two. This administration's approach has been to say the only way you're going to get affordable housing is if you're also willing to take a lot more market rate housing. And I think most people in this community would say that's not what we want. We want the affordable housing. We don't want a big upzoning with a lot more market rate housing that goes along with it. 2 other quick points. it was framed that special permits hurt small businesses. I think you could just as easily argue, if not argue better, that if you change it to as of right, it's actually the big guys who are going to be able to take advantage of that much more so than the small businesses. In fact, a special permit process, if done right, can be used to ensure that you only get the kinds of businesses and uses that you want that actually contribute to the community. And this brings me to my last point, which is that it's a little ironic that what we're hearing from the Department of City Planning and from this administration is, well, the system isn't working well, so we need to change it. A lot of why the system isn't working well is because the city refuses to enforce the rules that are on the books. They apply them in a way that reeks of favoritism. Right now, there's a special permit application in NoHo before the community board. The lawyers and lobbyists for the applicant are major donors to the mayor and the law firm to whom the mayor owes hundreds of thousands of dollars. I think we all know what the result is going to be on that application. So if the city wants to come before us with any credibility to say we want to make changes to improve your neighborhood, they should really start enforcing the rules as they exist and show themselves to be an even-handed player, which they absolutely have not up to this point.
Thank you.
Hi. I think it's great that DCP is looking into quality of life improvements in this transit-rich neighborhood. But if we want to ensure that neighborhood vitality in Soho, we need to reverse the trend of restricting residential development that results in rents that are increasingly unaffordable to everyone but the richest among us, including emerging new artists. And just so we're on the same page, New York City has a housing shortage. We've added 600,000 jobs in the last 8 years, but only 90,000 apartments. And we've gotten predictable results. The average rent in Soho alone is over $5,000 a month. For a two-bedroom, it's over $10,000 a month. It's insane. The only way we're going to keep any of New York City vibrant, let alone the heavily gentrified neighborhood that is Soho, is we're going to have to build enough units to meet the challenges posed by our growing city. Towards this end, Open New York has produced a report with specific recommendations of sites in Soho that could have an additional 3,400 new units, including 700 new affordable units that would be triggered through MIH. Thank you. Mandatory inclusionary housing. We have a report. You can read it. No taller than any existing buildings in the neighborhood.
Within the historic district, it matches the pre-war context.
Thank you. Mr. Levine.
Good evening. My name is Michael Levine, and I would like to do something I haven't heard yet tonight, and that is simply to thank the process team, to thank the leader of the process team for the time you have spent listening to the community. I think you should be thanked and congratulated. But there is a caveat to that, Jonathan, and we're going to hold you to your promise earlier this evening that you will continue to work with and listen to the community. I'm going to address only one of the things that you mentioned earlier in your presentation, which covered so much of what we had done in our workshop sessions, and that is the definition of joint living work quarters for artists. It's not easy. As a staff member of the Department of City Planning 50 years ago, when that text was written, we argued for a very long time, how do we define artist? And we simply asked the Department of Cultural Affairs to do that for us. It's 50 years later. I think everyone agrees it's time for us to reconsider, is this the appropriate way to govern who is allowed to be legally in Soho? I'm very encouraged when I hear you say that there are other kind of uses, makers, artists, artist makers, that can be considered as possible legal uses in Soho and NoHo. My one caveat is what was said to me 50 years ago by the City Planning Commission. If you open the door too wide and allow too many uses to come in, you may be driving away the populations you're seeking to protect right now. Be careful. Be very careful as to how wide the definition will be. Our first concern is to preserve what we have now, to protect those who are in SoHo now, SoHo, NoHo now, and our secondary concern is to make the area reflect changes in the community and how we can encourage additional uses without driving out those who are here now. Thank you. I wish you good luck, and you know you have our continued cooperation.
Thank you.
Hi, Jonathan. This is David Fall.
Hi, David.
I spoke at the last one briefly. I think you're doing a terrific job, by the way. I agree with what he just said. Thank you very much. Since there's a limited amount of time, I just want to address one thing that the very first lady brought up. It was a wonderful thing. It had to do with the 10,000 square foot limit on these giant retail stores. So here's my question. What happens to the ones that are already here? Do you grandfather them in, or are they going to be forced to size down? The issue with these giant retail mega stores like Zara, which has a footprint of maybe 3 times what is legally allowed. In other words, they're illegal now. You know, you've got Uniqlo and your Topshop and Nike. The issue, I don't think, is having these stores. The issue is what happens when you have the stores there. You have a caravan of trucks every night that don't make a lot of noise. You have a factory that produces garbage every night. Now, you know that I discussed this with you in the focus group, and that there are solutions about handling garbage, that they hold it inside and then they put it out when it's necessary and it's picked up. And I had to go, by the way, I've lived in SoHo for 29 years. I'm a condo board president for 19. And I had a big go around with Zara a couple years ago, and the sanitation department helped me. And they finally forced them to do this very thing, where they held the garbage in and had a special pickup company that picked it up so that the sidewalk wasn't lined with like literally 50 yards of garbage 6 feet high every night, 7 nights a week. Well, just about a week or 2 ago, they started doing it again, and I've started taking pictures again. I'm one of these condo board presidents that documents everything. I shoot pictures, video, I got all this stuff. I'm the kind of guy who sends letters to the DOB and the Department of Transportation saying, well, what are you gonna do about this? Well, the fact of the matter is that these mega retail department stores will not do anything unless there is a law, unless you enforce it, and there are consequences. And the problem is there are no consequences. The amount of trouble that I had to personally go through to get the sanitation department to go after them a couple of years ago was a big full court press, let me tell you. And I don't know if I really want to go through all that again. You know, I'm old, I'm retired, to be perfectly honest. And the big question I want to leave you with is, are they going to be grandfathered in or not? Because if I had my way, they would be forced to size down to the 10,000 square foot limit, because they contribute nothing culturally to SoHo whatsoever. And I want to say one more thing. There's a lot of outside big developer real estate money that's been doing a lot of social media propaganda on Facebook, and they don't sign their names. And I'm just wondering where they are and who those people are. Do they represent these big mega retail stores, or are they some other group? That would be my other question.
Thank you, David.
It's the Fix SoHo NoHo zoning, quote unquote. They have a website. They've been doing a lot of social media. There's no name attached to them. Who are they? I believe they're outside dark money. That's what I think they are.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm following up on that. I'm Marna Lawrence. I find it...
Okay, yeah, it's 10 after, so about 2 minutes. So
Okay, I
thank
find
you.
it extremely, I'm following up on that because that's one of my concerns. I find it extremely difficult to believe that the Envision NoHo SoHo process did not involve meetings, you can correct me if I'm wrong, with real estate entities and large business corporations such as NYU, possibly behind closed doors. Why haven't they been represented in any of these sessions? Why didn't you review any of the discussions that were had with those entities? Either before this review session or even during? And why is it that our public officials always leave before the public session? And You know, while we all understand protections for and clarity and simplification of zoning and DOB regulations for small, whatever that means, businesses in Soho no are essential, yet, I don't know, I have a question about the guiding principle with the oft-repeated buzzword vitality. Who in the Soho or NoHo communities ever shared with you that their neighborhoods are missing vitality?
Thank you. Oh, wait, I'm sorry.
Oh, good.
Hi, my main comment is about housing. I just wanted to make sure that, you know, we've heard a lot of stories tonight about how people came here a long time ago and really built this neighborhood up, brought it back from the brink. And unfortunately, Soho is in a position now where the contemporary versions of many of the people in this room could not afford to live here. So I was glad to see that there was at least some lip service paid to the idea of producing affordable housing. And I want to address something specific that Mr. Berman just said, who unfortunately just left the room. He painted a contrast between an affordability requirement under existing zoning and an upzoning that would produce market rate units and affordable units. And he obviously argued that the affordability requirement is a superior approach. But we have a very good test case for the ineffectiveness of that approach. And if you Google East Village rezoning of 2008 curbed, you'll see an article from last week saying that that approach, which Andrew Berman and his organization were vigorous advocates for, where it was essentially a downzoning with an affordability requirement, produced 55% of the affordable housing that it was supposed to produce. And ask yourselves, is the East Village any less, or is it more affordable now than it was in 2008? The answer is obviously not. It is much more expensive. So if we are to make Soho's housing more affordable and allow it so contemporary versions of many of the people in this room could live here, we need to produce a lot of housing. And we can do it in a way that does not disturb the historic context of this neighborhood. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.
Okay.
2 minutes, just
yeah, I know,
we're going to close this down, but we want to get to everybody else. Thank
I
you.
just say what I did not hear, you hear about a lot of people moving in and creating, what I'm concerned about is really the legacy of Soho and the living artists, that the pioneers that started this that are aging in place.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing was brought up, I haven't heard it anywhere listed, I bring it up every time, is this a community arts center, senior center, or something where there's a lot of money in Albany that was for senior centers. And Soho really needs one. As artists age in place, they become limited in where they can walk and need to get out of that and have very specific needs to a culture that's an artist community, which has to do with the state. It has to do with creating objects and making things and preserving them and getting them out. So that's one thing. I don't know if you have any seniors on your committee, but this constantly is left out. And it's a growing thing, especially if people stay. We want to keep people in their homes that are artists, so we need to provide for this. Second, we need a historic museum, whatever it's called. It could be a gallery, it can start small, but while people have things to collect, the architecture, if we want to really keep the legacy of Soho there, then create a museum here. I don't think it can start small. And I know we have some online, but I think physical things, I think that really help preserve, and there could be talks and community events at that space. But we have no spaces beside even open. It could be these ground floor spaces that could be provided for the community and the senior community, which we need also with Hurricane Sandy, things like that. We really need to have a place, and this community now that many of us have met each other, we want to stay in contact in Soho, NoHo. So,
thank you very much. I received another card from Jennifer Romine. Right. Oh, no, but she was next in line, but we have to pop over here first. Sorry.
Jonathan, I handed in the card initially, but I didn't get called.
Oh, but you stand right there. You'll get your turn. I'm sorry, sir.
Yeah, I'm here to address the housing portion of this meeting. This week, the state Senate passed a pretty historic set of new rent regulations. I think a lot of people in here are happy about. And that's great for current tenants of rent-stabilized units, but it doesn't really do much for people in not rent-stabilized units or immigrants or people who have dreams to move to New York City one day. So I'd like to, as this neighborhood's a very wealthy, vibrant community, and I think it should do its part in shouldering a load of residential development. Open New York has created a plan to allow for 3,400 new units, 700 affordable. And I hope you take a look at the plan and really consider that. It's very important that a neighborhood of this wealth does its part in residential development.
Great. Thank you very much.
Sorry, do you want to go first? Okay. Hi, my name is Jennifer Romine. A lot of you know me. A lot of you have been annoyed by me. Even if you support the Elizabeth Street Garden, I will not shut up, and I am not going to shut up. And I want to start by saying something. I have a great deal of respect for Margaret Chin. She's not here. She knows me very well. And we've got a long, intimate history because I live at 21 Spring Street. And 21 Spring Street is the 60% of a piece of land that was divided. Actually, it wasn't divided until Margaret started fooling around with it. And it was the same piece of land. And I live in the housing. I live in the affordable housing that the mayor says still hasn't been built. And all I did was put a paragraph from a land use disposition on Twitter asking Brian Lear to ask the mayor if he had looked at what I had handed him after our lovely conversation. And then I start getting investigated by the Pratt Institute, by members of the Land Use Committee, so I'm a little upset. But I want to go back to how capable and competent Margaret Chin is, because I stumbled into her office. It was during her first term, and I had been in court with RY Management, also known as DeMattis, who she made a deal with. I wasn't surprised, but she's been making deals with them for a very long time, which is why she helped me so much. I had been receiving rape threats. I had been in court for years. Why? Because I reported, because I'm from the Upper West Side, like Gail Brewer, where people actually have rights. And I was raised by people who respected those things. I was raised in a political family. So when I say I know how smart she is and how smart Gail Brewer is, I grew up with Betty Friedan. I grew up with Bella Abzug. I grew up with Walter Cronkite. I'm not going to go on, but these people had integrity. So what happened was I was getting rape threats. I went to Precinct 5. I couldn't get out of court. HUD couldn't help me. HUD in Washington, nobody could help me with the corruption of this landlord. And what happened was I went to Precinct 5. They looked at who was calling me. It was a man who was connected to the manager of my building. I go into Margaret and I said, I can't get out of court with these people. I don't owe them any more money. And I'm getting these rape threats by somebody who knows exactly what I look like, what my apartment looks like, and Margaret took care of it. Like magic, she took care of it. And what happened was I stopped getting those calls. She told me not to go back to the police. I stopped getting those calls, and somehow I got out of court. It was very, very tough. And Margaret Chin has been my hero, and when she was running for a second term, I called her office and I spoke to Paula. I said, what can I do to help? Because this woman is incredible. So let's go up to what's been happening lately, okay? I am more than a little upset. Why are Margaret Chin and Gail Brewer involved with men like Val Orselli of Cooper Square? A man, it's in the public record, who has sexually abused 90 female tenants in their apartments. A man who is guilty of extraordinary financial crimes. Again, in the public record. I grew up on Central Park West. I know it seems strange that I live at 21 Spring Street, but there are always good reasons for things. Because my father, who was an extraordinary broadcast journalist, was homeless from the time I was 14 to 31 when I got him into Manhattan Plaza. He died 2 years later. And I was homeless, as were my brothers, as teenagers. So I don't want to hear this crap about, or gay. My brother died of AIDS, by the way. So I know a little bit about caregiving and what people deal with. So back to what's going on now. I have got more documents in my apartment than I could decorate the 14 rooms on Central Park West. And the good news is, so does Jumaane Williams. So does the Attorney General. And it relates to the corruption in this district and the involvement between men like women, like these good women, and men like Val Orselli, because he has got massive files, incredible criminality, illegal contributions to gay supposed affordable housing. And why are they involved with people like Jim Farrat, who has told me and hundreds of others that he was given, I don't know what the truth is, but he is happy to go on Facebook and say, I could give a shit about the Elizabeth Street Garden. I've been offered a job at Sage, an apartment, and I was given money to run against Deborah Glick. This is not business as usual. Neither is investigating Jennifer Romine and me hearing from these crooks at Habitat for Humanity NYC, which is not Habitat for Humanity across the world. They have a dirty record. It's, again, in the public record. So why? And why aren't Margaret? Because I wanted to tell them to their faces how much I respect them. And when I think about Margaret, I'm pained because she really, really helped me. So I hate saying this, and I am a private person. I don't want to have to be all over the place doing this.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Will Thomas. I live in the East Village, and I was heartened to see that the presentation mentioned the need for building more housing on underdeveloped land, but I feel extremely uneasy about the heavy emphasis on maintaining current zoning in terms of density. Most planners know that New York has a profound housing shortage, and yet we've seen little attempt to speak to session participants about the need for more housing. Instead, we've had a listening process that was unfortunately biased towards people who have the time and means to show up to these meetings right after work and who mostly already have secure housing in this neighborhood. I find it troubling that allowing greater densities for affordable housing was proposed based on input from your online tool, but the in-person reaction was apparently enough to table it. But again, those who can show up to these meetings are not exactly representative of New York City at large. I bet if you went and asked average renters in Chinatown, they would rather this neighborhood prioritize affordable housing, even alongside market rate housing, over maintaining aesthetics or neighborhood character. I fear this project as designed is leading us in the opposite direction. The organization I'm with, Open New York, an independent all-volunteer group, we have... I work in marketing.
Let him finish, please.
No. No. Anyway, we've released a plan, and I would say it's a very reasonable one to allow greater densities outside the historic district and add contextual density inside. We've identified various sites that would allow at least 3,400 new homes and almost 700 units of affordable housing. I'd ask that you try to make this this process more representative moving forward so we can at least have a fair hearing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your patience.
Hi, my name is... Hi, my name is Thomasine, and I live and work in Soho. I'm an artist. My husband's an artist. And first of all, I want to thank you for this amazing presentation. It was so thoughtful and so well done. And I appreciate that you're listening to additional comments as well. But my comment is actually about the last four commenters on that side and the guy wearing black who's about to speak because he's been at one of the meetings. You guys aren't part of the community, and you're not makers, you're not artists. So it's not like you're artists trying to get into the community. You're not makers trying. You're just representing something else. And I feel that maybe there's a different forum for that. I don't feel like this is the forum for you to be talking about that.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, my name is Jake. So we got a pretty interactive crowd tonight. I'm curious, how many people here are market rate renters? That is, not stabilized, not artists, not homeowners. Anybody? That's about what I thought. Cool, so I wanted to talk about the notion of stakeholders in this process. Excuse me, can I speak? Just counting against my time.
Please,
Oh, he's taking this on.
nonetheless, let him talk.
It's a public meeting, guys. So I wanted to talk about the notion of stakeholder because, as you said, you spent a lot of time and effort reaching out to stakeholders. As far as I can tell, stakeholders means just residents of the neighborhood, right? This is a neighborhood where the average home value is over $2 million. It's a neighborhood that's 77% white. So I would ask if that's the right notion of stakeholder, because people outside the neighborhood have a stake here too. And in particular, this affects housing growth, right? That's the problem, right? So as far as I can tell, you're about to recommend that we add no units of housing to SoHo, right? And quite frankly, fine, 100, whatever. As far as that, now, how many people of my generation, of my age, did you see at these meetings? Because I was there, I was at every single one of them in this process, and it was damn near zero. And it's because nobody my age can afford to live in SoHo, because the homes cost $2.3 million and the rent is $5,000 a month. So you, whatever. So, what? That's the problem. What I'm saying is, in this process, we essentially asked a lot of people who already lived in this extremely desirable, wealthy neighborhood, close to two of the largest job centers in the Western Hemisphere, if they thought we needed more housing here. It turns out they already have apartments, so they said no. I bet if you asked other people who want to live here but don't, they might give you a different answer. So, I hope you think about that as you're writing up your report. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Oops. Well, with that, I want to again thank everybody for being here and also for staying late. This process does continue. This presentation will be available on the website shortly, like later tonight, first thing in the morning. And I look forward to the process as it goes ahead. Good night. Yes, sir. Yeah, thank you so much.